What makes for a good Oscar race? Compelling narratives, unpredictability, clashes of titans, political intrigue. Some years fail to pique the interest of even the most dedicated awards fanatics. Others are stuffed to the brim with performances that might have won if the actresses didn't have the misfortune of running against each other. 1974 is one, 1987 is another. But one race people tend to point to as potentially the greatest of all time is 1950.
The nominations for the Best Actress are Miss Anne Baxter in All About Eve.
You better sit down. You look a bit wobbly.
Miss Bette Davis, All About Eve.
Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night.
Miss Judy Holiday, Born Yesterday.
What's a peninsula? It's not you, her.
It's that new medicine.
Eleanor Parker in Caged.
I'm a big girl, and this isn't my first year away from home.
Miss Gloria Swanson in Sunset Boulevard.
All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
The winner is Judy Holiday.
This race had everything. Narratives, unpredictability, a clash of titans, political intrigue, and people have been debating its result for decades. I know I have my personal preference, and I'd love for you to guess who that is. Just take a wild guess at who that might be. So in today's video, I'm going to break down everything 1950. How a newcomer put on her best New York accent and won over a veteran making her comeback in a stinging commentary on aging in Hollywood. Wait a second. How a newcomer put on her best New York accent and won over a veteran making her comeback in a stinging commentary on aging in Hollywood. People have been asking me to make this video for years, so let's just get right into it. The Best Actress race of 1950. Before we get started, thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring today's episode. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of classes that anyone can join. Make sure you stick around to the end of the video to learn about how you can get started learning with Skillshare.
Well?
Very funny. But where's the glamour?
Oh, the glamour. Wait a minute now. Oh, it's right down here. Gloria Swanson. She was one of our first glamour stars.
Oh, I want to see her in action.
You do?
Yes.
All right. We'll start it right now.
Good.
Gloria Swanson, one of the great personalities of this generation in a role that comes to an actress once in a lifetime.
Gloria Swanson may be best known today for her performance in Sunset Boulevard, but it was her work in silent films that made her a star. On screen, Swanson was a versatile actress known for her independence, modernity, and ability to absolutely turn a look. She made her film debut in 1915, and the next year signed with Mack Sennett's studio, where she became an accomplished comedienne. She soon moved on from the Sennett comedies and signed with famous players Lasky to work with director Cecil B. DeMille, who helped solidify the Swanson persona. Janine Basinger writes in her book Silent Stars that in their 6 films together from 1919 to 1921, he turned her into a symbol of a particularly new kind of American woman, sophisticated, soignée, and definitely not a virgin. Although young, this woman was married, so she already knew about the birds and the bees. She was rich, magnificently, and luxuriously well-dressed, with jewelry to knock 'em dead in Peoria. Their films together made Swanson a household name and a top box office draw. Off-screen, Swanson lived a life almost as grand as the one she portrayed on screen.
You know, it's funny, after all these years, when I say a movie star, I still think of Gloria Swanson.
Remember, in the 19-teens and 20s, movies were a new technology, film a new industry, the movie star a new concept entirely. And many of the things we now take for granted as defining features of the movie star, we owe to Gloria Swanson and the grandiose way she lived her life. Her fashion, her wealth, her ambitions, the fanfare, who she dated, married, divorced, and what she represented to women across the country who would never meet her but were inspired by what they saw flickering on the screen. Eventually, tiring of the extravagant glamour in DeMille's films, she sought more complex character work wherever she could get it, in the films of Alan Dwan or Sam Wood, or eventually in films she produced for herself through her various production companies, including Sadie Thompson, which netted her her first Oscar nomination for Best Actress at the very first Academy Awards ceremony, no less, She earned another Oscar nomination in 1929 for The Trespasser, her first sound film. Now, given the success of The Trespasser, it initially seemed that Swanson would avoid the fate of many of her silent film colleagues and easily make the transition to sound. Her voice sounded great, she proved to be quite skillful with dialogue, and yet a major sound career never quite happened. As the industry faced a new decade and the country faced an economic depression, Swanson never really hit in the same way she had in the silent era. She made a handful of mildly successful films, culminating in 1934's Music in the Air, a commercial failure, notable only for being the first American screenplay of a 27-year-old Billy Wilder. Frustrated with the way things were going in Hollywood, Swanson turned her attention elsewhere, to raising her children, business, radio, theater. She became a rich woman independent of film with plenty to occupy her time, in no rush to return if the material wasn't there. And to her, a lack of material was the problem. She quit pictures for a simple reason. There just weren't many roles for her to do. I was a type difficult to cast. I was neither the ingenue nor the matron. I wasn't the wholesome outdoor type nor the sinful exotic. I was between types, so I left. It took her 7 years to return to the screen in 1941's Father Takes a Wife, a romantic comedy that really only made me laugh because of its incredible tagline on Letterboxd and because they dubbed Desi Arnaz's singing. At the time, it seemed like this would be Gloria Swanson's big comeback. But the film is not good. Coincidentally, she plays an actress who wants to get married, prefiguring some of the questions asked in All About Eve and Sunset Boulevard.
Well, you'll never be able to lose this great identity of yours and just be my wife. You'll never be satisfied to settle down and grow old gracefully.
Like Music in the Air, the film flopped, and Swanson again retreated to other venues. As big of a star as Swanson had been, and as dead as her film career seemed, she couldn't have anticipated that the role that would define her legacy was just around the corner. Billy Wilder and Charles Brackett first worked together in 1938 on the screenplay of Ernst Lubitsch's Bluebeard's Eighth Wife. From there, the partnership blossomed. Hits like Ninotchka, Ball of Fire, and The Lost Weekend gave the pair prominence in the industry and a level of autonomy that few other writers and directors of that era ever earned. If they had an idea that they wanted to turn into a film, Paramount would not only listen, but more than likely allow them to make it. In 1948, the pair began to seriously explore a film that would turn the camera on Hollywood itself. According to Stephen Cohen's BFI Classics book on the film, although Gloria Swanson had yet to be cast, Wilder and Brackett's early treatments of the screenplay refer to the character of the fated film star as the Gloria Swanson setup. Despite this, Wilder first approached other actresses to gauge their interest in the film, Mary Pickford, Mae West, and Greta Garbo among them, all of whom rejected the proposal. Whoever played Norma Desmond had to be willing to acknowledge her age, to frame herself as a has-been, and her work as indicative of a bygone era, and to publicly confront the industry that had given her so much and taken it away as she aged. She had to be humble enough to consent to this, humble enough or confident enough not to care. It's difficult to imagine someone like Garbo, for example, ever agreeing to something so self-reflective and pointed. Swanson, the original reference, seemed to be fated for the role in more ways than one. When Wilder first approached Swanson to screen test for Sunset Boulevard, he and Brackett had not yet finished the screenplay. In fact, the script was in such a raw state, Swanson recalled in her memoir, Swanson on Swanson, that when she asked, "Who murders whom?" Wilder responded, "We honestly aren't sure yet." Given how much of the screenplay had yet to be fleshed out, Wilder and Brackett welcomed Swanson's input while crafting the world of Norma Desmond, to the point that I would suggest that we should think about Gloria Swanson as much more than just the star of Sunset Boulevard. I'd go so far as to say that the film would never exist in the form we know it today were it not for her influence on virtually every aspect of production. Here's where the screenplay eventually landed. Sunset Boulevard follows a down-and-out screenwriter named Joe Gillis. In order to avoid his car getting repossessed, he pulls into a random driveway. At first, he thinks the strange mansion is abandoned, but he comes to find out Norma Desmond, former star of the silent screen, lives there with her faithful servant Max. Norma asks Joe to assist her with a screenplay she's written for herself, and although he has little faith that Norma could actually make a return to the big screen, he needs the money and accepts the job. Joe eventually becomes absorbed into Norma's bizarre fantasy, and while he dreams of escaping to once again pursue legitimate screenwriting, he can't. Manipulation, fear, and paranoia haunt the mansion as Norma desperately seeks not only her return to film, but also Joe's complete devotion. Gloria Swanson had major input on the script, pushing Wilder and Brackett to make Norma more vulnerable. She suggested the Chaplin impression, for example, and pushed back against the idea that Norma would be living in decay. Cohen writes, in discussing the part with Brackett, she argued that since Norma had $1 million, real estate downtown, and oil wells in Bakersfield, she should not, as the script then suggested, live in squalor, and this advice was taken. Wilder also cast supporting roles around Swanson that added meta layers to the film. For the lumbering, stoic butler Max, Wilder recruited Erich von Stroheim, who had famously directed Swanson in Queen Kelly, a sweeping romantic drama that went so over budget and took so long to make that the financiers pulled the plug on the film after Swanson complained. It was never finished under von Stroheim's direction, although Swanson filmed an alternative ending just to have something that they could release in theaters and recoup some costs. No version of the film was officially released in the United States until 1967, but in a stroke of genius, von Stroheim actually suggested using clips from Queen Kelly in the scene where Norma watches her old films.
Actually, face-to-face with Erich von Stroheim was when I did Sunset Boulevard. And we never spoke of Queen Kelly. In the whole 3 months that we were making Sunset Boulevard, I don't think we ever mentioned it to each other.
Then, of course, there's that cameo by DeMille, the man who had been so key in developing Swanson as a star. He even refers to her as young fellow in the film, the nickname he'd given her in real life.
Well, hello, young fella.
Swanson influenced the film aesthetics as well. She provided the photos all over Norma's house. She works closely with costume designer Edith Head to dress Norma. In her scene with DeMille, for example, she added a single white peacock feather to her hat as an homage to the headdress she wore in Male and Female, one of their most famous films together. Head later wrote of her experience with Swanson, "I found her not only easy to work with, but particularly helpful because she had so many costumes already planned in her mind. It became a project where I actually designed with the star instead of for her, because she was recreating a past that she knew and I didn't. She showed me how she would be moving in each scene, and she was careful to point out the differences between how she would have done things in the early days of Hollywood and how they were being done in 1950. I love this quote from Edith Head because it gets at something so integral to the essence of Sunset Boulevard. The film depicts a clash of time periods. Joe lives in post-war Hollywood, a world where studios hope to persuade audiences to abandon their televisions by making Technicolor epics, where opportunities for screenwriters were rapidly drying up, where the past had become nothing more than a faded memory. Norma, on the other hand, is stuck in the silent era, her car a clunky relic, her home lit by candles, bathed in luxurious fabrics, relishing excess and ornate detail over mid-century functionality. Of course, Norma is mentally stuck in the past too. Just as her home has not evolved with the times, Norma remains obsessed with her former fame, ranting about the alleged superiority of silent film and raging about her past achievements. Swanson's performance in this film is big, perhaps for modern audiences, excessive to the point of comedy. She puts her whole body into each line delivery, waving her arms and angling her head as if posing for the camera. Her voice taking on a dramatic lilt as if delivering a monologue.
Then why they still write me fan letters every day? Why do they beg me for my photographs? Why? Because they want to see me, Norma Desmond.
This performance might be big, but it's also quite clever. Watch any Gloria Swanson performance other than Sunset Boulevard, and you will understand that these exaggerations are not typical for Swanson, but rather a deliberate choice. In playing a woman plucked out of another time, Swanson explicitly employs a style of acting that evokes the silent screen, where expressions, or faces, substituted for dialogue. Cohen sums this up perfectly. Through their differently styled performances, Swanson and Holden enact two different Hollywoods as personified by their characters. His low-key, naturalistic performance measures, by comparison, the oversized and Baroque style that Swanson uses to depict Norma's estrangement from the present. With its cloistered atmosphere and opulent, if outmoded decor, the mansion functions as the perfect setting for Norma's often histrionic performance of a silent screen heroine. She may have once known how to play to the camera, but now she has to settle for playing to her room. Swanson, as an actual silent film star, lent the film an authenticity in this regard that it might not have had with another actress. 2 world wars, an economic depression, and the invention of the television had passed since Gloria Swanson made her film debut. So much had changed culturally that even though Swanson's stardom had peaked less than 25 years before Sunset Boulevard was released, as Basinger writes, she and the world of the movie seemed to come from a time and place so remote that few could remember it. Who could know better than she did how to play an exotic diva from the era? Everything about her, from her leopard trim, her cigarette holders, her bangle bracelets, to her bed shaped like a golden swan, and her outre open-air automobile, seems completely authentic, because it is. For what it's worth, this is what frustrated me about the recent revival of the musical, that a story that traffics specifically in contrasting appearances, atmosphere, and environment was essentially stripped of time and place. Jamie Lloyd's minimalism erases the substance that could exist via aesthetics. If Norma represented an antiquated time, it meant that the film industry had grown up, and it had now been long enough to reflect on how it had grown up and the implications of those changes. Filmmaking as a practice had changed quite a bit, but one thing actresses had certainly learned as the industry grew was how disposable they were. How studios would build them up, give them an unimaginably lavish lifestyle, only to abandon them when the wrinkles started to show. I'll get more into this subject in the next section, but it's important to know at this point that such incisive commentary on the film community made Sunset Boulevard risky. Wilder and Brackett knew this from the beginning. According to Donald Brackett's book Double Solitaire, The Films of Billy Wilder and Charles Brackett, when the duo sent the original treatment of the screenplay to the upper brass at Paramount, they included a note stating, "Due to the peculiar nature of this project, we ask all our coworkers to regard it as top secret." As Swanson got more involved, she realized its potential too. Writing later, Billy Wilder deliberately left us on our own, made us dig into ourselves, knowing full well that such a script about Hollywood's excesses and neuroses was bound to give the Hollywood people acting in it healthy doubts about the material or about themselves, depending on their individual security. Upon its release, they were proven correct. As Thomas Pryor explained in his review in the New York Times, the industry rarely took a critical look at itself. The occasions when Hollywood has looked into its own closet for possible story material and come up with other than routine backstage musical plot have been as rare as snowflakes in August. The history of the fabulous celluloid industry is overflowing with the pathos and laughter of life, but the authors who feed the voracious cameras seldom mind this rich source. Perhaps they are too close to the scene, are themselves caught up in the whirlpool, or are prudent to the point of unabashed subservience to the front office. So depending on who you asked, the film was either the sharpest commentary on Hollywood to date, or an offensive affront to the industry. So while critic James Agee called it courageous and the most ambitious movie about Hollywood ever done, and Edward Schallert of the LA Times called it one of the most remarkable pictures ever produced, Louis B. Mayer, for example, cursed out Billy Wilder after a private screening and accused him of biting the hand that fed him. Broadly speaking, though, the reception of the film was positive. It wasn't a box office smash, performing better in larger cities, while its reception in less sophisticated areas was regarded as dubious. Swanson's performance was a smash, though. She returned in a burst of glory and was magnificent in a role which demands subtle shadings of pathos as well as sweeping flourishes and hysteria. Dar Smith of the Daily News emphasized Swanson's bold choices. This is like no Swanson that you've ever seen. She plays it broadly with controlled exaggeration, and she is magnificently mad all the way through it. Surely, Gloria Swanson would see her 3rd Academy Award nomination for Best Actress, but she wasn't the only one confronting the aging star trope. In fact, she wasn't the only one making a comeback. In 1950, Bette Davis was a 2-time Best Actress Oscar winner and 8-time nominee, depending on how you count. She had been president of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, co-founder of the Hollywood Canteen, and at various times one of the most popular box office draws in the country. She was, by all rights, one of the true queens of Hollywood, a living legend. But it had been a few years since it actually felt like she was. By the mid-1940s, her popularity began to decline. Her movies weren't as good, and worst of all, they weren't making as much money. Perhaps the reaction to her last film with Warner Brothers, Beyond the Forest, mostly known for this line,
What a dump.
Hedda Hopper wrote of the film, if Bette had deliberately set out to wreck her career, she could not have picked a more appropriate vehicle. Relations soured, and in 1949, she and Warner Brothers mutually decided to end her contract. She exited her home of 19 years, where she had made more than 50 films, unceremoniously.
If you go into this business and expect gratitude or thanks, I finished 18 years at Warner's, built many sound stages there, never got a letter of goodbye, ended up in the back lot with a sound man, Heinz Blanke, a producer, till dawn, having drinks, and that's how I left the Warner lot.
Now that's the kind of disposability and a lack of graciousness that might be embarrassing for the industry were someone to expose it. Studioless, in an unhappy marriage with an abusive husband and young child, Bette Davis's future was unclear. Little did she know a peak was around the corner. In 1950, any actress would have been clamoring to work with Joe Mankiewicz. He just won 2 Oscars for writing and directing A Letter to 3 Wives and was known to work well with actresses. Anne Baxter later said, Joe knows more about women than any man I've ever met. We're all just made of glass. He knows what makes us tick, and it makes him a superb director because he knows what's deep in us. He had just penned a screenplay for 20th Century Fox called All About Eve, an adaptation of a short story by Mary Orr called The Wisdom of Eve, about an aging Broadway star named Margot Channing who welcomes a bright-eyed fan named Eve into her inner circle, only to discover that the devoted fan was really quite the ambitious actress, hell-bent on copying and eventually usurping Margot's career, no matter the cost. What a great role, Margot Channing. Towering but vulnerable, fierce yet fearful, a take-no-prisoners diva of the highest magnitude who gets to deliver some of the most iconic lines in film history. And to think, the role nearly went to Claudette Colbert. Unfortunately for Miss Colbert, it wasn't meant to be. The actress suffered a severe back injury while shooting the film Three Came Home, and, unable to meet Fox's inflexible shooting schedule, was forced to withdraw. Fox scrambled. They needed a new leading lady, and quickly. According to Sidney Laydenstone-Stern, author of The Brothers Mankiewicz, Daryl Zanuck, head of Fox, and Joe Mankiewicz debated who could possibly replace Colbert. Zanuck wanted Marlene Dietrich, Mankiewicz wanted Gertrude Lawrence. Both of them didn't work out. The last person Zanuck wanted was Bette Davis. But Bette Davis was who was available. She wrote in her memoir, The Lonely Life, "When I finished reading All About Eve, I was on cloud 9. It's easy to understand why. It was a great script, it had a great director, and was a cast of professionals, all with the parts they liked. It was a charmed production from the word go. After the picture was released, I told Joe he had resurrected me from the dead. He had, in more ways than one. He handed me the beginning of a new life, professionally and personally." So, on March 8th, 1950, it was announced that Bette Davis would replace Claudette Colbert in Fox's upcoming drama All About Eve. Production would begin in less than a month. It's freak accidents like Claudette Colbert's back injury that make you believe in fate, because it is almost impossible to imagine anyone else playing Margot Channing. In fact, I find it extremely difficult to describe this performance because I consider it so self-evidently perfect, the ideal marriage of actor to role. There are so many choices that I'm simply obsessed with. Hitting this paper.
It gets better.
This hair swoop.
That's never stopped you before.
This line delivery.
Max, you sly puss.
Like, damn, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Davis has always had an undercurrent of neuroses to her acting style. She moves constantly, punctuating her dialogue with her body. Mankiewicz's screenplay gives Davis ample opportunity to unleash these instincts, to become a blazing comet of suspicion and rage. This scene is the perfect example. Her spine acts like an accordion, pushing to emphasize certain words. And watch how she listens, her eyes blaring, her fingers twitching. This woman is ready to explode, and Mankiewicz gives us the perfect line to confirm what Davis's body language has been telling us all along.
Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night.
Margot's neuroses are, of course, rooted in how her aging might affect her career and her relationship with Bill Sampson. Even before Eve's nefarious intentions are revealed, Margot suspects that she poses a threat simply by virtue of being a beautiful younger woman around her younger partner. And now in her 40s, Margot can no longer believably pass for a woman in her 20s, even on the stage, traditionally a much more forgiving medium than film. Might the simple march of time destroy everything she loves at once? Bette Davis in this role specifically is so fascinating because Margot's resistance to and fear of aging is so antithetical to the Davis persona. As Molly Haskell observes in From Reverence to Rape, it is ironic that in All About Eve, Davis is declared obsolete by standards of glamour in a sweepstakes that she, of all people, had never entered. She's right. Davis notoriously embraced the unglamorous side of acting, whether shaving her hairline to play Queen Elizabeth, or applying her own makeup to appear ill in Of Human Bondage or in Mr. Skevington. Davis, more than virtually all of her peers, challenged the notion of the actress as inherently glamorous. Movie star status be damned, if the role called for her to look dowdy, she would look authentically dowdy. All About Eve asks Davis to expose Margot's vulnerabilities in a way that I believe calls on that same fearlessness. She pulls back the curtain on backstage life, vigorously rubbing cold cream onto her face to remove makeup. She wakes up in the middle of the night exhausted. Sorrow sits on her face as she drinks through her depression at a party. In this scene, we know for sure that Davis was willing to go where other actresses might not, because Gertrude Lawrence refused to play this part when Mankiewicz offered it to her, specifically on the basis of this scene. It's also difficult to imagine, for example, Claudette Colbert, an actress who literally refused to be photographed from the right side of her face, giving the same raw dedication to this role. Now, lest we forget, this is a very funny film. Davis starred in a few comedies here and there throughout her career, but was by no means primarily remembered for her comedic gifts. All About Eve, though, shows just how deft of a comedian she could be. Margot has a sardonic sense of humor, and Davis locates that tone brilliantly, spitefully needling her opponents.
What'll you have?
A milkshake?
Or slipping a devastating takedown through a smile.
But I wouldn't worry too much about your heart. You can always put that award where your heart ought to be.
But All About Eve wouldn't work without the right Eve to antagonize Margot. Mankiewicz selected Anne Baxter, who was conveniently already under contract to Fox, and who he believed was capable of portraying the burning, ruthless, driving, and at times evil force that is the core of Eve. An Academy Award winner herself, Baxter also contributed some additional gravitas to the production. In 1947, she won the Best Supporting Actress Oscar for her performance in The Razor's Edge. She played Sophie MacDonald, a young woman whose husband and daughter die unexpectedly in a car crash. She becomes addicted to opioids and alcohol, and eventually turns to sex work in order to survive. At just 24 years old, decades younger than every other actress nominated in her category that year, her win seemed like the kind of win that would elevate her into that upper echelon of movie stars. But that hadn't quite happened yet. Really, Baxter's career had been defined in fits and starts. The daughter of a wealthy family, her grandfather was architect Frank Lloyd Wright, she had demonstrated an interest in acting at an early age. She made her Broadway debut at 13, and at 17 was offered a contract at 20th Century Fox on the basis of her screen test for Rebecca. She took on a variety of roles, so as Screenland put it, she became known as a versatile performer who had adroitly avoided being typed. But really, if we're reading between the lines, it's not that Baxter was this chameleonic actress who could do anything. It was more that Fox didn't really exactly know how to use her, and were trying various types of roles to see what hit. So she'd be offered something truly interesting like Orson Welles' The Magnificent Ambersons or Billy Wilder's 5 Graves to Cairo, but then something less interesting like Crash Dive. She'd win an Oscar for The Razor's Edge and then do something silly like The Luck of the Irish. For years, movie producers kept on discovering Anne Baxter and then tossing her back into obscurity. An understandably frustrating experience for an actress that will become very relevant later in the video. Maybe All About Eve would be the vehicle that would really make it happen for Baxter. Eve is a much more difficult role than is often acknowledged. Margot is all surface. She doesn't like to hide her feelings, and even when she does, she barely plays at the pretense before showing her hand. Eve has to hold two selves at once, the submissive servant who only wants to see Margot succeed, and the conniving willing to deceive and betray her friends so that she can climb the ladder of success. Eve is not one for an outburst, unless truly cornered and fighting for her life. She's methodical, so Baxter's performance rests on subtle changes. Outside of All About Eve, I'd say Baxter is quite a melodramatic actress. The success of this role is how controlled she is. She plays Eve steadily. The difference in expression between Eve at her most devious and at her most friendly isn't very stark at all. She has such a silky, deep voice that she can wield in versatile ways. Softly like a bedtime story for the tragic tales she weaves when she first meets the group in Margot's dressing room, but also sharp like a whip when she finally reveals her true intentions.
You better sit down. You look a bit wobbly.
Mankiewicz loved her performance. In fact, Leighton Stern writes, Joe considered Anne Baxter's performance so impressive that he assumed she would steal the film and worried Bette Davis would be hurt that she had the lesser part. Once he started putting the film together, he saw that it was Davis's. It is Davis's film. Reviews concurred. Bette Davis gave one of the best performances of the year, if not all time, and framed her success as a reminder of how much of a powerhouse she actually was, in spite of the poor material she'd been given over the past few years. The Los Angeles Times proclaimed that Hollywood's most thrilling comeback of 1950 was made by its finest actress, Bette Davis. Hollywood wondered, was Bette Davis through? The answer is that a girl like Bette is never through until the last gong has sounded. The Philadelphia Inquirer echoed, those who mourned Miss Davis will find they were a bit premature. For never in her active professional life has she been better, nor half so good as on this occasion. The New Yorker said, Bette Davis finally has a part that permits her to demonstrate her high-voltage style, that when her talents are applied to something worthwhile, she can really bring a great deal of authority to bear. Miss Davis, often in unflattering makeup, jumps from comedy to pathos to hysteria with utter confidence, and she winds up by transforming a most difficult character into a lady who, however shrilly emotional, commands the sympathy of one and all. Baxter received positive reviews too, although it was difficult for critics to fall in love with Eve the way they did with Margot. Eve, a woman with such insidious motives and a name that evokes obvious biblical imagery, was instead constantly referred to as a snake. Miss Baxter as the viperish young one. Margot is the chief target of the young viper. Talk about venomous women. This lady has so much in her blood that if she held an asp to her bosom, it would be the snake that died. The simultaneous release of Sunset Boulevard and All About Eve caused quite a conversation too. The films share a number of characteristics. Both films use a narrator, both use flashbacks as a framing device. Wilder actually filmed a more extensive flashback in which Joe tells his story to other dead bodies in the morgue, but it went over so poorly with test audiences that they cut the sequence and wrote a new one. Both films feel entrenched in the entertainment industry and make pop cultural references throughout, using real names and locations. Both even name-drop Daryl Zanuck.
They're pretty hot about it over at 20th, except I think Zanuck's all wet. Can you see Ty Power as the shortstop? Zanuck is impatient. He wants me. He needs me.
Zanuck, what are you two lovers?
But obviously the thing that ties them together most intimately is a shared concern for the aging actress. Personally, I find All About Eve's structure more sympathetic, as it allows for more access to Margot's interiority. Margot is in the process of a current professional decline, and Mankiewicz puts her through all 5 stages of grief. We see her struggle to define herself, weigh her personal and professional lives against each other, and lean on her community to adjust. In Sunset Boulevard, Norma has already experienced a tectonic shift in her life. Who can say what really happened to Norma in the interim period between her last film and Joe's appearance on her doorstep? While All About Eve constantly shifts from perspective to perspective, Sunset Boulevard firmly roots us in Joe's shoes. We hear his insecurities, relief, and fear, and through him, we observe the results of Norma's isolation and rejection, the futile efforts at a return, her narcissistic obsession with her younger self, and heartbreaking nostalgia for a different time. Not to agree with Bosley Crowther, but I generally like his take on the comparison. Both are victims of glamour exploitation, both are lonely, both are afraid. These are occupational hazards to which any popular idol is exposed. But the actress in All About Eve is a woman of considerably more light and shade, of more magnitude in her profession, of more wit and more personality, and she is beautifully played by Bette Davis, with a fluidity and finesse that not only mark her best acting, but some of the best that has been done on the screen. At the same time, while I personally prefer how All About Eve grapples with this so-called glamour exploitation, I also don't think Wilder is aiming for a realistic understanding of this problem. Sunset Boulevard functions as a film noir. Although in 1950 that genre was only beginning to be identified and described by critics, the film clearly has a mood in mind that veers toward expressionism rather than realism. Norma's dimly lit, shadowy home with her grand, anachronistic behavior makes Sunset Boulevard feel like a ghost story, heightened to express the perverse consequences of show business rather than meticulously describe them as is. Norma's descent down the stairs in full psychosis may never happen in real life, but the way Hollywood treats women makes you feel like it could. And isn't that the most fucked up part about it? Interestingly, Wilder and Brackett argued throughout production about how to represent Norma's mental state, with Wilder pushing Swanson for a stylized performance influenced by sinister aesthetics and the exaggerated style of silent film, and with Brackett pushing for something more realistic. For example, Cohen writes, Brackett didn't like Swanson's delivery of her speech about the movies. Billy assures me that it will be so arresting in the sinister atmosphere of the house that it won't matter. He may be right, but I feel she could be coached into something more human. I didn't dig specifically into this, but it would be interesting to explore how Brackett and Wilder's upbringings influenced their stances on this issue. Brackett, the Harvard Law School graduate and New Yorker drama critic aiming for realism, versus Wilder, whose filmmaking was never exactly known for its visual panache, but whose film education broadly occurred in Berlin at the height of German Expressionism. Regardless of how All About Eve and Sunset Boulevard do it, both films are describing an experience that has almost exclusively been portrayed in gendered terms. As Molly Haskell points out, despite the fact that men constitute at least half of the acting profession, actors are rarely, unless they die dramatically or drink spectacularly, the subject of films. In American cinema, actresses, not actors, give voice to anxieties about aging and the loss of relevance through characters like Norma, Margot, even Elizabeth Sparkle. Actors who experience increasing irrelevance do so for reasons other than aging. The most famous example of this, the A Star is Born films, depict a man suffering from addiction. In 1937's It Happened in Hollywood, a silent film star's career takes a nosedive after the emergence of sound, presumably the same thing that happened to Norma. Unlike Norma, however, he revives his career as an action star after he stops a bank robbery in real life. Because these twin images of aging actresses emerged simultaneously in 1950 and caused such a splash so as to spawn increasingly outlandish knockoffs, I'd argue that this is really the beginning of hag horror, a genre that rose to prominence in the 1960s and characterizes older women's anxieties about aging as grotesque. Former actresses unable to move on from their bygone fame are a persistent trope of hag horror. I mean, think about it. Whatever happened to Baby Jane is Sunset Boulevard taken to its extreme. A woman out of time, delusionally plotting a comeback no one has asked for, pushed to violence, and ultimately losing touch with reality altogether, surrounded by what she assumes is her loving public. Both Swanson and Davis, just a decade apart in age, understood this subject intimately and spoke candidly about their experiences with diminishing opportunities as they aged.
I'm one of the people that believes in romance, and I don't think that has any age, and somehow in Hollywood it does have. You will notice that all the old boys, all the old stars are still there, though they may wear toupees.
And the girls?
The girls are rather young and attractive and about sometimes 30 years younger. And when I went around the country for Sunset Boulevard and another picture which I liked very much, The Heiress, I talked to the women who I really believe were responsible for making motion pictures successful, because it was Mary who took John to the picture show. And she had to like that gal up there. She had to identify herself with the woman that was playing the part. Well, she goes to the picture shows now. He identifies himself with Gable or Bill Powell, but opposite Bill Powell or Gable or the rest of them, Cooper, is some young thing that could be her granddaughter or daughter, so she doesn't find herself there at all.
No sense of identification.
No.
Davis gave her perspective in an interview with Hedda Hopper in the Los Angeles Times. The story of Margot Channing is the story of every actress, of every career woman. People get the idea that actresses my age are dying to play younger women. The fact is we die every time we play them. But most pictures are written for younger women. And as Tallulah Bankhead once said when asked why she took a bad play, every now and then you have to earn a living. So you take parts you know are not good for your career. This quote does hint at one key difference between Sunset Boulevard and All About Eve that might have affected the way Academy voters approached these films. Margot is a stage actress. All About Eve takes the occasional swipe at the film industry, the running joke about how real actors don't leave Broadway for Hollywood, for example. But it reserves its most stinging commentary for the stage. And yet, Davis is right. Margot could be any actress. One could easily apply All About Eve's criticisms and concerns to Hollywood just as much as to the stage. And people did. In other words, while both films confronted how carelessly the entertainment industry throws away its respected artists, Eve had less potential to ruffle the film community's feathers. There's no All About Eve equivalent to Louis B. Mayer leaving a screening in a huff. And so by October 1950, the Best Actress category seemed to be shaping up for an all-timer clash. Two of the best films Hollywood had ever produced, starring two living legends and an Academy Award winner, facing off against a newcomer.
Born Yesterday stars Judy Holiday in her history-making stage role as Billy Dawn.
Judy Holiday was the kind of overnight success that was actually 12 years in the making. Born Judith Tuvim in New York City, she was shy, intellectual, and drawn to the theater, only not initially as an actor, but as a writer and director. In 1939, she co-founded a performing group called The Reviewers with the songwriting duo Betty Comden and Adolph Green. The ensemble spent their weekends at the Village Vanguard in Greenwich Village, satirizing contemporary politics and spoofing show business figures like Noel Coward and Joan Crawford. As the group's popularity grew beyond the nightlife scene, Holiday became the centerpiece attraction, recognized for her natural charisma and comedic gifts. Talent scouts at 20th Century Fox liked what they saw in the comedian and offered her a contract, which she accepted. But when Holiday arrived in Hollywood, the studio acted at best indifferent and at worst actively hostile toward her. They pegged her as just another pretty little blonde with a tendency to get too fat, and stuck her in such prominent roles as extra and defense plant welder. She had one substantial supporting role as an airman's wife in Winged Victory, but after about 6 months, her journey in Hollywood was over. She rejected unwanted sexual advances from Darryl Zanuck, and shortly thereafter, her contract was not renewed. Back to New York City she went. Her breakthrough came in 1946 when she was cast as the last-minute replacement for Jean Arthur in the Broadway production of Born Yesterday. The play, written by Garson Kanin, tells the story of Billy Dawn, a former chorus girl and live-in girlfriend to Harry Brock. Brock is, on paper, a junkyard tycoon. In practice, he's a kind of gangster who bribes politicians and engages in illegal business dealings. The couple moves to Washington, D.C., where Harry plans to lobby congressmen. And Harry, blind to his own improprieties and ignorance, sees Billy's lack of manners and knowledge about the American government as a barrier to his work. How can he entertain the DC elite if Billy can't keep up with the conversation? So he hires journalist Paul Verrill to tutor Billy in all things DC. Through this process of education, Billy experiences a kind of awakening, realizing not only that Harry is a literal criminal, but also that she deserves more from her partner than constant derision and, unfortunately, physical abuse. Born Yesterday was enormously successful on Broadway, running for over 3 years and 1,600 performances before it became a film. Studios were eager to snap up the rights, hoping to replicate that success. Unfortunately, the rights landed on the desk of the last person Garson Kanin would have wanted, Harry Cohn, president of Columbia Pictures. Cohn was a known tyrant and took a cruel attitude toward Holiday from the get-go. When Kanin suggested that she repeat her stage performance for the film version, Cohn rejected the idea outright, responding, "That fat Jewish broad?" It's atrocious comments like this that no doubt influenced Holiday's extreme dieting prior to appearing in Born Yesterday. Instead of hiring Holiday, Cohn began an industry-wide search for a different actress to play Billy Dawn. Any actress. The search dragged on and on to the point that the press began to compare it to the lengthy audition process to cast Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind. In the meantime, Kanin found some collaborators and hatched a plan. He and his wife, Ruth Gordon, were writing a screenplay for MGM called Adam's Rib, about two married lawyers who take opposite sides of an attempted murder case in order to wage a proxy gender war on each other. Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy, but particularly Hepburn, were apparently so enthusiastic about Holiday's performance in Born Yesterday on stage that they suggested Kanin and Gordon expand a minor role in Adam's Rib and offer it to Holiday as a quasi-audition. A proof of concept, if you will. Once Cohn saw how engaging Holiday could be on the screen, he'd have no choice but to offer her the role of Billy Dawn. Hepburn and Tracy personally lobbied Holiday to accept the role in Adam's Rib, and she did. You truly could not have asked for a better ally than Katharine Hepburn. Again and again and again, she publicly stated her Judy agenda as plainly as she could for anyone who would listen. I want Judy Holiday to do Born Yesterday for the screen. According to Holiday's biographer, William Holtzman, Hepburn even insisted on favorable blocking for the newcomer, which is not something every leading lady would offer. In their two major scenes together, Kate saw that the angles favored Judy and at one point played with her back selflessly to the camera. When somebody later suggested some cutaways to Kate during Judy's scenes, she commanded in her chilly Bryn Mawr tone, "No, this is the way it's supposed to be." Their plan worked. Holiday was a hit.
Did you at that time intend to kill Beryl Kane? No.
And soon her presence was requested at Columbia for a screen test. Again, the team behind Adam's Rib conspired on her behalf. According to the New York Times, the cameraman on Adam's Rib talked to the Columbia cameraman who was going to take the test. George Cukor, the director of Adam's Rib, talked to Charles Vidor, who was going to direct the test. And Katharine Hepburn, of course, sent out bulleting on her own. Surprise, surprise, the woman who played a role for 3 years was good at said role. Columbia was extremely enthusiastic about what they saw, and after 28 months, 38 actresses, and 10 official pronouncements, the Los Angeles Times could finally report in January 1950 that Judy Holiday would probably cinch the Born Yesterday role. In 1950, it was considered an enormous coup for a stage actress to reprise the role she had created on stage. Practically revolutionary, in fact. Or as the New York Times snarkily put it, all available evidence points to the fact that Hollywood considers it illegal, or perhaps simply unimaginative, to use the creator of a successful stage role in the movie version. Funnily enough, one of the most prominent beneficiaries of said policy was probably Bette Davis, who built a career on adapting Tallulah Bankhead's stage roles for the screen. Many people also suspected that she based her performance of Margot Channing on Bankhead. Just as with Swanson and Davis, it is difficult to imagine anyone else playing Billy Dawn. Judy is so damn funny from the minute she's introduced. Like, here's her first line.
Hey, Billy!
Holiday gives a highly physical performance in this film. She walks with a flamboyant shimmy. She turns with a subtle bounce. Her aggressive enthusiasm in this card game is simply transcendent. And of course, this voice...
Are you one of these talkers, or would you be interested in a little action?
...is not her real voice. Here she is in Winged Victory, for contrast.
I'm sick of big cities. I wish I didn't have to go back to one.
Yes, Holiday raises the pitch of her voice and plays up her New York accent, but it's the strange, airy quality in her delivery that I think really takes this performance to another level. Sometimes she just lets a line trail off in a really unexpected way that makes the line much funnier than it might be otherwise.
All right, manifesto.
I don't know.
Why didn't you look it up?
I did look it up. I still don't know.
And other times she'll just let it rip like a foghorn.
You ain't gonna be telling nobody nothing pretty soon.
Double negative, right?
Right.
Holiday tunes these intonations to perfection, blaring loudly to emphasize Billy's unrefined quality, shrugging off a line to mask her insecurities.
I think I know what it is, Ellie. I'm not sure.
But this performance is not simply a comedic gimmick. I'd argue that Holiday's warmth and sensitivity make the whole thing tick. Scenes like this one, where Billy and Paul attend a concert, showcase her kindness and openness, that she has a deep well of feelings no one had bothered to consider, much less take seriously. These moments help the audience understand that any growth she experiences comes from her own innate intellect and empathy. Still, Billy's trademark feature is her intellect, or lack thereof. Many of her best gags play on her ignorance or use her naivete to expose the overcomplicated qualities of the elite. While Billy was far from the first dumb blonde character, Holiday's performance defined that trope for the era and was broadly discussed in those terms. If you haven't seen this film, you might think, based on the summary I gave, that the story has the potential to feel quite condescending, right? Like, smart man teaches dumb lady about the Constitution. And I guess there are some moments where you're like, okay. But overall, I would argue that the film doesn't come off that way. More than anything, the film advocates access to education and demonstrates the ways in which education empowers citizens, or more specifically, women, to resist oppression. The key irony of the film is that Billy isn't dumb at all. There's a difference between being dumb and being completely and deliberately deprived of information. By embracing learning and therefore winning her financial and personal freedom, Billy becomes an aspirational figure. Ariel Schudson points out in her article about Born Yesterday that this is not just unique for 1950, but unique specifically within the context of the Best Actress race. Billy is unambiguously heroic in her own story, while the other nominees star in a collection of sympathetic but cautionary tales. The problem for Holiday was that she was so convincing in the role that some people began to believe that she actually was a dumb blonde. Strangers would treat her as an idiot child or disapprove frozenly from a distance. And this was particularly frustrating for Holiday because it couldn't have been farther from the truth. Holiday was, and I don't say this lightly, but a genius, well-read, an accomplished writer, and completely turned off by the idea of the general public perceiving her as dumb. So a lot of her press was really about dispelling the idea of Judy Holiday and reintroducing her as the beautiful blonde intellectual who had to learn to be dumb. We have been educated to understand that appearances and acting assignments deceive. They frequently reported her high IQ and emphasized how Holiday had one goal for her career moving forward: never play a dumb blonde again. I have carved my current niche as a noble nitwit. Now I want a part where I can use my own hair, my own voice, and maybe even be literate. As she had with the stage version, Holiday received rave reviews. Sensations occur about twice a minute in Hollywood without, as a rule, elevating anybody's blood pressure. But you would have thought a bomb had gone off in the vicinity of Hollywood and Vine the night Columbia previewed Born Yesterday with Judy Holiday as Billy Dawn. Crowther wrote in the New York Times, playing the wondrous ignoramus that she created on the stage, this marvelously clever young actress so richly conveys the attitudes and the vocal intonations of a native of the sidewalks of New York that it is art. More than that, she illuminates so brightly the elemental wit and honesty of her blankly unlettered young lady that she puts pathos and respect into the role. She, too, seems locked in for a Best Actress nomination, which only leaves Eleanor Parker is often looked upon as the sort of straggler in this group. Not the winner, not in an iconic film, she's just kind of there. Why her, right? Like, was all of America completely blinded by its Puritanism and therefore unable to sufficiently appreciate Ingrid Bergman's performance in Stromboli? Yes, of course. And yet I'm here to say that we should put some respect on Eleanor Parker's name and that her performance in Caged is actually quite good and worth your time. By 1950, Eleanor Parker had been around for close to a decade. I'd say she'd had a comparable experience to Anne Baxter in the sense that she'd been sort of circling around major stardom for a while, but never really got there. She also signed with the studio as a teenager and played supporting and eventually lead roles in rather prominent films, a remake of Human Bondage, Pride of the Marines, and Voice of the Turtle with co-star Ronald Reagan. However, where Anne Baxter seemed to want to climb to the top, Parker seemed to value her work-life balance and was willing to hit pause on her career if she felt she had to, even in its ascendancy. By the time Caged hit theaters in 1950, Parker hadn't starred in a film since Voice of the Turtle in 1947. She didn't like the projects Warner Brothers had offered her, so she rejected them and willingly took suspensions. But it wasn't as if she spent those 2 years just in revolt against Warner Brothers. She also got married, honeymooned, had a baby. I probably received my salary for only 6 months during 1947 and 48, but I can't regret that, she said. All my life I wanted a child, and anything that might happen to me professionally on that account would hardly seem a loss. So when Parker nabbed 2 lead roles in 1950, Chain Lightning and Caged, it was as if, as the Los Angeles Times put it, Parker was practically starting a new career after a 2-year absence from pictures. Writer Virginia Kellogg committed herself to 4 state penitentiaries over a period of 2 months to research Caged, a fictionalized expose of a woman's prison. When Parker learned about the role, she had to have it. Joan Crawford told me about it, she told the Los Angeles Times. She was over for dinner one evening and said she'd read a wonderful script, that it was just right for me. This is the only role I've ever fought for. I was determined to get it by any means. Jack Warner didn't think Parker was right for the role, but after she conducted her test, he changed his mind. The film opens on Marie Allen's arrival at the Women's State Penitentiary. Surrounded by repeat offenders who know the rules and routine by now, Marie is clearly a fish out of water. She's extraordinarily tense and afraid, and hardly seems the type to step out of line, much less commit a serious crime. Of course, she hadn't. Her husband committed armed robbery and was killed in the process. She was convicted of being an accessory for running to help him as he was dying. Marie tries to keep to herself to preserve her innocence, but the prison's corrupt, sadistic matron makes it impossible. The women jockey for resources, brush up against oppressive rules, and do their best to survive. But to make matters more complicated, Marie is pregnant and must deliver her baby behind bars. And since I guess everyone had a meta element in their films this year, Parker actually was pregnant while filming this. Parker draws on Marie's arc from shivering innocent lamb to disillusioned, fearless femme fatale beautifully. She embodies this transition so naturally. At the end, we see Marie's mugshot, a reminder of who she was when she initially entered the prison, only to see the woman she has become enter the room. This is a completely different woman, and you believe it because we have suffered with her over the course of the film. And I mean really suffered. She was given good reviews, a creditable and expressive performance. Although reviews for the film itself were mixed, with some critics finding its brutality cliché. And while I personally agree that it feels riddled with clichés, particularly when it comes to a standard of the women's prison genre, the manipulative lesbians, I do think that for 1950, it does a good job illustrating the ways in which the prison system ultimately accomplishes the opposite of what it professes to do. Rather than rehabilitating inmates, it abuses them and makes returning to life outside impossible. How, for example, in order to get parole, you have to secure a job outside of prison. The prison system is supposed to help you find one, but they take their damn time. You try to find one yourself, but who's going to hire an inmate? Gangs can arrange a job for you, though. Work for them, and you're out in a matter of months instead of 15 years. So you begin to understand the ways in which crime becomes a rational choice created by the system rather than some character flaw or moral failing. In another year, Eleanor Parker might have had a real shot at the Best Actress Oscar. But in 1951, she had the unfortunate privilege of giving a really good performance the same year 4 other women gave 4 great performances. The nature of her celebrity didn't help either. Not only had Parker been absent from the screen for 2 years, but even when she was present, she apparently kept to herself, preferring her small group of friends to industry, cocktail parties, and nightclubs. She was Hollywood's mystery girl. Even to herself, Eleanor Parker is the least known star in the movie city. She didn't have much of a shot. She knew that. Everybody knew that. Associated Press journalist Bob Thomas bluntly stated, "Miss Parker doesn't hold much hope for her chances in the annual Oscar Derby at the Pantages Theater." "I'll be there, but I don't expect to go home with an Oscar," she responded. As for her prediction, she thought it would be a toss-up between who else? Betty, Gloria, and Judy. And it basically was.
The Academy Awards, Hollywood's night of nights, even with the 2 top Oscar winners absent.
Female star performance. Here's the toughie. Seldom has there been a tighter race in this division, and it's continuing right down to the wire, wrote Bob Thomas, summarizing what everyone knew to be true. Best Actress was the race of the year, and who would win was anyone's guess. Anne Baxter, Bette Davis, Judy Holiday, Eleanor Parker, Gloria Swanson. How does one pick between them? Baxter and Davis's tandem nominations for All About Eve marked the first time women from the same film competed against each other for Best Actress. Now, to me, if I'm honest, Eve Harrington feels like a supporting performance in the Margot Channing show, although I know some of you will militantly argue otherwise. I can already see it in the comments. Actually, I calculated the screen time and they're roughly equal. Her character's name is in the literal title of the film. Of course she's a lead. It would be category fraud if she were placed in supporting. I hear you, I do, and I applaud your efforts at consistency and fairness in a ceremony that has never once displayed those qualities. It appears, however, that Daryl Zanuck initially agreed with me. Michael Schulman explains in his book Oscar Wars that because the studios designated eligibility, Baxter had taken her campaign to Zanuck and convinced him that Eve Harrington was a leading role, that she should be in Best Actress and not in Best Supporting Actress. Why do this? Why put yourself in a competition with 2 of the best reviewed performances of the year? In this era, categorization wasn't exactly a technical measurement of who had the bigger role or how the role functioned within the film. It was a metric of status within the industry. Best Actress was broadly reserved for leading ladies, the capital S stars, while character actors typically won Best Supporting Actress. Consider the Best Supporting Actress winners throughout the 1940s, the formative decade of Anne Baxter's career. Jane Darwell, Ethel Barrymore, Anne Revere, Celeste Holm even. These are all extremely capable, prominent actors, but they were not of the same star caliber as Ginger Rogers, Ingrid Bergman, Joan Crawford, Olivia de Havilland, etc. For an actress whose career was defined by being discovered, then tossed back into obscurity, who sat awkwardly between lead and supporting, perhaps one can understand why Baxter might have felt that this categorization would have a big impact on her future. By all rights, the critical hit of the year should be the thing that takes your career to the next level. She had already won Best Supporting Actress. If she won it again, would that mean she would never be considered a leading lady in the same vein as your Bette Davises or your Ingrid Bergmans? Ironically, these distinctions started to change in the 1950s, and it probably wouldn't have affected her either way, but she couldn't have known that at this point. Her role may have been less flashy than Davis's. She may not have been a superstar like Davis, but thanks to her own efforts, she saw she was recognized as a lead alongside her. Fox would then submit Celeste Holm and Thelma Ritter for Best Supporting Actress, 2 women who, unlike Anne, never escaped that category. Virtually everyone involved with this decision eventually came to believe that Anne Baxter's categorization in Best Actress potentially prevented Bette Davis from winning this award. Schulman quotes Joe Mankiewicz as saying, "Bette lost because Annie was nominated. Annie lost because Bette was nominated." Sam Staggs quotes Baxter herself, who said in an interview in 1985, "I decided recently that I was wrong. I should have accepted another supporting Oscar, and then Bette would have undoubtedly gotten hers." Bette obviously agreed. It's hard to say whether or not that's actually true or not. It's not like we have data to support this either way. After all, there's no guarantee that if someone voted for Anne Baxter, their next choice would definitely be Bette Davis. Just because I wanted Bette Davis to win doesn't mean that Anne Baxter was my second choice. Speculate in the comments below who that would be. Rather, I think it's a question of resources. In 1950, the studio system was fighting for its life thanks to the proliferation of television and new regulations placed on the industry by the government. However, studios had enormous power and mobilized that power to sway voters, not unlike the campaigning that happens today. It mattered whether or not an actress was under contract to a studio, because that studio would then have an incentive to fight for her. Awards mean prestige, which typically translates to a box office boost, and that's why we're all really here, isn't it? Remember, Anne Baxter was under contract to Fox, meaning her future successes would be Fox's too. Davis brought no such guarantee, and not just because of her contract situation. While it's true that Davis and Swanson were running on comeback narratives, the nature of Davis's comeback requires further analysis. Swanson had made sound films, but was primarily remembered for her silent film work. Like Norma Desmond, she was back from another era and ready for a close-up. Davis's low point, on the other hand, was fresh. As back as Davis seemed with All About Eve, who could guarantee that it wasn't an anomaly? Would her next film be just as bad as Beyond the Forest? There was also Davis's reputation to consider. Davis wasn't the kind of woman you'd expect to win Miss Congeniality, let's put it that way. And more than likely, many of the people who didn't like her for whatever reason, or who had heard nightmare stories, would still be active within the industry. Many of them would be voters. Davis referred to it in good humor in her memoir, The Lonely Life. When it was announced in the papers that I would play Margot Channing, Mankiewicz received countless phone calls commiserating with him. And that anecdote is true. Mankiewicz did get calls, and it made him nervous to work with Davis. "Dear boy, have you gone mad?" Director Edmund Golding wrote him. "This woman will destroy you. She will grind you down to a fine powder and blow you away. She will come to the stage with a thick pad of long yellow paper and pencils, and she will write. And then she, not you, will direct. Mark my words." The Los Angeles Times openly wondered if Davis's reputation might ultimately affect the vote tally, politely putting it this way: Bette Davis has scored a 10 strike in critics' votes in such cities as New York, London, and San Francisco. But it is likely the Hollywood viewpoint will be different. Worth noting, though, by the way, Mankiewicz found Davis very easy to work with and a hard worker. But perhaps Davis's most important hater was Darryl Zanuck himself. The two had a falling out when Davis was president of the Academy in 1941. Zanuck had personally advocated for her to become president, but was upset when Davis proposed a series of radical changes to the organization. Davis quickly understood that her presidency was mostly symbolic, and they never intended to accept her ideas. "If I couldn't function, if my suggestions were disregarded, why should I bother?" she said later. "They wanted a mere figurehead, someone famous to publicize the Academy. I didn't know that. I wanted to rule." So Davis resigned. Livid, Zanuck told her she'd never work in Hollywood again. Well, she did, obviously, and all of her proposed changes were eventually adopted by the Academy anyway, go figure. But the two hadn't spoken for 9 years, and were on such bad terms that by the time Zanuck reached out to Davis for All About Eve, she actually thought it was a prank. She couldn't believe that the real Darryl Zanuck would actually be on the phone calling her for any productive or generous reason. So I ask you, who do you think Fox would throw its money behind? The young actress under contract to their studio? Or the older one, who doesn't work for them and had a decade-long beef with the most important man on the lot? Paramount, on the other hand, prepared an elaborate strategy for Swanson's campaign that began long before Sunset Boulevard was even released. After Sunset Boulevard wrapped principal photography in June of 1949, Swanson embarked on an extensive cross-country tour promoting both her upcoming film and Paramount's big release of 1949, The Heiress. She pushed herself to exhaustion, visiting over 33 cities in 13 weeks, working every weekend, and making 3 to 4 appointments during the day. In addition to Swanson's tour, the studio also devised a unique screening campaign to generate buzz for the film. According to Sam Staggs, author of Close Up on Sunset Boulevard, beginning in January 1950, Paramount's publicity department altered its usual practice of showing a new picture to accommodate requests, for example, from the press, from industry officials, special interest groups, and the like. Rather, preview screenings of Sunset Boulevard stretched out over a period of some 8 months. By August, 21 such previews had taken place. That mayor outburst would have been at one of these. According to The Hollywood Reporter, many of those 21 screenings were virtual premieres as a result of the list of stars who attended. The innovative screening schedule worked. Long before its release, Sunset Boulevard became the most talked about picture of 1950. We love the effort, we love excitement, but one has to wonder whether this strategy ironically worked against Swanson. Because Paramount stretched its screening schedule over the course of 8 months for a select group of industry insiders, it's very possible that many voters would have seen the film over a year before they actually voted for the awards. Charles Brackett believed this negatively affected Swanson's campaign and even suggested that some screenings happened as early as 1949. He wrote in a letter to Swanson, "You'd have walked away with it had the picture had a 1949 release. Never forget that a great many of our members had seen Sunset not in early 1950, but in late 49. All sense of timeliness was gone." Sure, voters can see a film more than once, but we know how these things go. Momentum dies, doubts creep in, we overanalyze. Being late to the party is often advantageous, which certainly seems to be the case for Born Yesterday, which was rushed for a year-end release in order to qualify for the 1950 Oscars. We can see this dynamic play out in the writing of Bosley Crowther, for example, who wasn't an Academy voter, to my knowledge, but who would have had a similar experience to many Academy voters. In an August 1950 piece on Sunset Boulevard, he wrote about how he first got a gander several months ago when Paramount, breathlessly impatient to show the trade what it had, was hotly previewing the treasure for every editor and critic in town. So he saw the film several months before August, which itself was a few months before the release of All About Eve, and over half a year before the release of Born Yesterday. He'd exhausted all praise for the film by the time Born Yesterday came out in December, just in time to make itself evident as one of the best pictures of this fading year. Yes, Wilder required numerous reshoots for Sunset Boulevard, but it does seem possible that if Paramount really wanted to, they could have released the film in 1949. After all, movies were made a lot faster in this era. Consider the fact that Bette Davis got the role of Margot Channing in March 1950, and the film came out that October. Born Yesterday concluded principal photography in August 1950 and came out that December. Born Yesterday may have had the advantage of being the dessert to a scrumptious year of cinema, but that didn't mean everything was as easy as pie. I'm so sorry for that sentence I just wrote. I'm very tired. On June 22nd, 1950, a group of former FBI agents released a report called Red Channels, the report of communist influence in radio and television. The document claimed a cabal of communist sympathizers used their positions of influence within the entertainment industry to promote Soviet propaganda, and listed the names of 151 entertainers and journalists who had participated in or donated to so-called communist causes. On page 90 of the report appeared writer, director, and producer Garson Kanin. On page 78, actress Judy Holiday. Now, Holiday's political proclivities were grossly inflated here, but she was anti-fascist and left of center, and as we know in the United States, those are basically considered the same thing for some reason. Goes without saying that it was not good to be called communist in 1950. Consequences ranged from surveillance to the loss of one's career to literal jail time. After all, the Hollywood 10, a group of leftist screenwriters and directors, were sent to prison in 1950 for refusing to answer questions about their political affiliations before the House Un-American Activities Committee. Red channels became a key document in the blacklisting of entertainment figures. But because the report was published before Born Yesterday was released in theaters, Holiday seemed to avoid the kind of backlash major fame might have attracted. Holtzman writes, their primary targets were the radio and television industries, and so Judy, whose work at the time was exclusively in theater and movies, seemed initially unaffected. But the report did prompt conservatives to be extra cautious with Kanan and Holiday's work. Perhaps the greatest outbursts came from, who else? William J. Mooring, film critic for the Catholic newspaper The Tidings, wrote in his review that Born Yesterday was the most diabolically clever political satire I have ever encountered in almost 30 years of steady film reviewing. Been more subtly molded to carry a destructive comment through disarming comedy. While he complimented Holiday's turn as one of the most captivating comedy performances ever seen in a movie, William Holden, he wrote, was making an argument for all the world as if he'd freshly graduated summa cum laude from the University of Karl Marx. This review mattered because Mooring was a syndicated columnist, meaning his article appeared in over 20 papers around the country and had the potential to negatively affect the film's box office. Indeed, his article prompted some Catholic viewers to picket the film. Now, I've read some silly overreactions from the Catholic Church throughout film history, but this one specifically is so f***ing dumb.
There's a Constitution, a Declaration of Independence, and a Bill of Rights.
Born Yesterday has such obvious affection for the American government, or rather has affection for an idealized version of the American government. Aesthetically, the film celebrates political Americana, DC's neoclassical architecture, the country's founding documents, and the writing of its original political thinkers are all experienced with wonder and awe through Billy's eyes. Thematically, Kanan connects Billy's personal and political awakenings. As she reflects on the country's founding documents and their stated purpose of overcoming a tyrant, she begins to understand what a tyrant actually is, and that she has been living with one all along. Harry, then, is not just an abusive husband and corrupt businessman, he's the story's stand-in for fascist leaders. Billy stands up to him, in part, by reminding his conspirators of their duty to the American people and of democratic principles.
Is Harry more important than anybody else?
No.
Then how come he's got so much to say? Whoever voted for him?
Harry's comeuppance is a triumph for democracy. To be offended by his takedown is really just telling on yourself. It seems as if I'm not alone in my assessment, because even conservative thinkers and writers rolled their eyes at Mooring's review. Luella Parsons, gossip columnist and devout Catholic, wrote in her column that if there are any pink ideas infiltrated into Born Yesterday, they're way over my head. Frank Scully, columnist at Variety, humorously suggested that if the propaganda was so finely woven that nobody could see it, it's quite possible it wasn't there at all, and Mooring was merely suffering from what my Air Force friends among the Pentagonians call a mass hysteria emphasized by an acute personal hallucination. It eventually got to the point that the managing editor of the Tidings released a statement that Mooring's review in no way reflected clerical opinion. Holiday escaped the claws of the blacklist for now, and many journalists believe she had a decent chance at winning the Oscar. In a poll conducted by the Associated Press among 100 reporters, Judy Holiday was voted the Best Actress of 1950. She nosed out such prominent brunette actresses as Bette Davis and Gloria Swanson. Bob Thomas believed she was pushing the two elder stars for contention. Her dumb blonde role made her an immediate star, but also conceded that the great popularity of All About Eve might well make Davis the first star to win 3 Academy Awards, or that Swanson might snag the sentimental vote for perhaps the greatest comeback in film history. Ultimately, of all the predictions I read, it varied depending on when the prediction was made, but it essentially cycled between the three of them. Swanson might win the odds, but then had a hopper wrote about Bette Davis, "If the job doesn't get her the 3rd Academy Award, I'll miss my guess." Which is funny because she is literally in Sunset Boulevard.
Time, sit at desk. Hedda Hopper speaking.
Who would win was really anyone's guess. Here's where caution comes to the rescue. Nothing would induce us to wager a Russian ruble, if we had one, on the Academy's final choice of Best Actress. It's going to be a tough one. Funnily enough, none of the top 3 contenders attended the Oscars ceremony on the night of March 29th, 1951. Davis was in the UK filming Another Man's Poison, Swanson was starring in 20th Century on Broadway, and Holiday, who never much liked the Hollywood scene or fame generally, stayed in her hometown where she too was preparing for the stage. The ceremony happened to fall 2 days after Gloria Swanson's birthday, so she planned to perform in 20th Century, then gather for a little party to listen to the Oscars ceremony over the radio. Coincidentally, her co-star in 20th Century was Jose Ferrer, who was nominated for and would win Best Actor, and who was also named in Red Channels. Somehow, her birthday party ballooned from an intimate get-together to a sort of Oscars East, complete with 280 guests, 6 nominees, including Judy Holiday, Celeste Holm, and George Cukor, and reporters from major newspapers and magazines. Ferrer, Swanson, and Holiday gathered at the same table while the press snapped pictures of the group waiting in suspense. You know, this party may not have been the one Swanson initially envisioned, nor was it the kind of party Holiday might have normally enjoyed, but I'm glad it turned into what it did, purely because all the images from that night are incredible. Finally, the moment came.
The winner is Judy Holiday.
The room burst in excitement as Holiday was handed a prop Oscar used in 20th Century. Swanson joked, or maybe didn't, that Holiday should have waited for another year to give such a performance. Davis undoubtedly believed that she deserved the Oscar, or at least deserved to win an Oscar for what she considered her best work and not as a consolation prize, but never publicly expressed any disdain for Holiday or her win. Gathered with the cast and crew of Another Man's Poison, she apparently said, "Good, a newcomer got it. I couldn't be more pleased." Years later, she also expressed praise for Swanson's performance, saying in an interview with Playboy, "Swanson was up for an award that year, and if she'd won, I'd have shouted hooray. She was sensational, just fantastic, and she had never won." All About Eve was the night's major winner, picking up 6 Oscars, including Best Picture, Director, and Adapted Screenplay, meaning Mankiewicz had won Best Director and Screenplay 2 years in a row, an incredible feat to be sure. Wilder and Brackett picked up Original Screenplay for Sunset Boulevard. Surveying where things went from here, we see a group of women frozen in time, the prestige gained by these performances simultaneously haunting and sustaining the course of their legacies. Ironically, Eleanor Parker, usually the most disregarded actress in this lineup, is the only one who seemingly escaped the shadow of 1950. She gave an even better performance the next year in Detective Story, but is instead primarily remembered as the Baroness in The Sound of Music. Anne Baxter may have won her Oscar for The Razor's Edge, but undoubtedly Eve remains her most iconic role, or maybe Nefertari if you're freaky. Davis has a much wider, much more complex legacy, with many iconic roles under her belt and at least one significant role to come. But even for a personality as domineering as Davis is, Margot Channing proved harder to shake than she could have anticipated. During the course of filming All About Eve, she and Gary Merrill, the actor who plays Bill Sampson, fell madly in love and married in July of 1950. It soon became clear to the both of them that they had conflated their characters with their true selves. "Our personality differences were getting in the way of our happiness together," she later wrote. "I was not Margot Channing, and he was not Bill Sampson." Although Davis considered the relationship her only true marriage, it didn't last. Unlike Margot, Davis's career could not take a back seat forever, tidily ending with a title card. And Merrill couldn't handle it. But they weren't alone. The press also blurred the line between the character, Margot Channing, and the person, Bette Davis, bluntly conflating the two as one and the same. Margot, Bette, it's all the same, and if you liked Margot, you'll love Bette. Davis had played an actress before, but seeing her so thoroughly embody an actress with brassy charm, sharp wit, and a considerable ego made it seem like she was simply playing herself. And while I don't think it's that far off, if I'm being honest, the perception quickly overwhelmed Davis's persona. Many of Davis's roles post-Margot read as attempts at replicating the magic she and Mankiewicz captured in All About Eve. The problem is, most writers aren't as competent or as sensitive as Mankiewicz, so many of these vehicles devolved quickly into caricature. Perhaps the most famous example is The Star from 1952.
Come on, Oscar. Let you and me get drunk.
Ultimately, this culminated in whatever happened to Baby Jane a decade later. Davis, who would have understood more than anyone how people expect a faded star to behave, pushed those stereotypes to the extreme, constructing the quintessential grotesque image of the fading star, and once again reigniting her career. Pauline Kael later sympathetically wrote, "When you're larger than life, you can't just be brought down to normalcy. It's easier to get acceptance by caricaturing your previous attitudes and aspirations, by doing what the hostile audience already has been doing to you. Why should Bette Davis let impersonators on television make a fool of her when she can do it herself and reap the rewards of renewed audience acceptance?" Gloria Swanson would have to ask herself the same question. It didn't take long for Gloria Swanson to understand that although Norma Desmond was a blessing that reignited her career and ensured a legacy perhaps stronger than just her silent films would have afforded her, Sunset Boulevard also had its drawbacks. First, she spent a lot of time clarifying that silent stars were not all shut-ins on the brink of madness, nor was she actually like Norma Desmond in real life. It eventually became clear to her that when people saw Gloria Swanson, they expected Norma Desmond. She wrote in her memoir, "During my years of obscurity, the public had forgotten Gloria Swanson. In order to spring back to them in one leap, I had to have a bigger-than-life part. I found it all right. In fact, my present danger seemed to lie in the fact that I had played the part too well. I may not have gotten an Academy Award for it, but I had somehow convinced the world once again of that corniest of all theatrical cliches, that on very rare artistic occasions, the actor actually becomes the part. Barrymore is Hamlet, Garbo is Camille, Swanson is Norma Desmond." She first noticed this, ironically, during the Academy Awards. After Holiday won, the press swarmed Swanson, hoping for drama. It slowly dawned on me that they were unconsciously asking for a bigger-than-life scene, or better still, a mad scene. More accurately, they were trying to flush out Norma Desmond. She knew Hollywood's instinct would be to ask her to repeat her iconic performance again and again until she became some sort of creepy parody of herself, or rather of Norma Desmond, a shadow of a shadow. And that did happen to a certain extent. Sunset Boulevard didn't reignite her film career, and the few roles she did get asked her to either resurrect Norma Desmond or explicitly play herself. By the end of the decade, realizing that she might as well lean in and cash in on the film's already solid reputation, she commissioned a musical version of Sunset Boulevard in which she could once again play Norma Desmond.
Those wonderful people out there in the dark.
The musical never really went anywhere, which you can learn all about in the documentary Boulevard, A Hollywood Story. Although, as we all know, society could not escape the concept.
Sunset Boulevard.
Right. Oh.
What a huge character.
Still, Swanson was too unique to truly be boxed in on the industry's terms. The public may have thought of her as Norma Desmond, but she lived a varied, engaged life. She started her own clothing company, became super involved in wellness and nutrition, and in the 1980s took on her scariest role to date, supporting Ronald Reagan. Judy Holliday may have aimed to abandon the dumb blonde stereotype, but found herself doubling down on it instead. In the wake of her Oscar win, Holliday failed to see the lucrative offers that typically accompany such an honor. As Holtzman points out, Judy was now big game, and the growing number of anti-communist newsletters stepped up their attacks on her. NBC dropped plans for a television show starring Holliday because advertisers expressed fear about her alleged communist sympathies. Sponsors pulled money from television shows she was set to make guest appearances on. And Columbia, to their credit, protected Holliday by investing a lot of money into fighting these allegations, hiring PR reps and legal counsel, and putting her in contact with relevant government officials. everything came to a head less than a year after her Oscar win, when on March 26, 1952, Holiday was forced to testify before Senator Pat McCarran's Internal Security Subcommittee, which was tasked with investigating communist influence in the entertainment industry. I think sometimes we fail to recognize how extraordinarily degrading and terrifying this experience must have felt for Holiday. She hadn't committed a crime, nor was she accused of one. Yet everything was at stake here. At 2 months pregnant, she had to sit in a Senate committee chamber for 3 hours and pick apart every event she had ever attended, dollar she had donated, petition she had signed, person she had known, and word she had uttered. All of this was made worse by the fact that she was almost certainly targeted because she was Jewish. Pat McCarran, head of the committee that interrogated her, was a virulent racist and anti-Semite who was pushing an immigration bill that would revoke citizenship and limit immigration for Eastern Europeans, who he believed were infiltrating the country with communist ideals. Unsurprisingly, most of the entertainers he brought before the committee were Jewish. Perform badly, and she would lose everything she had earned in her career. Perform badly, and she could put her friends and colleagues at risk. In his article, Just Born Yesterday, Judy Holiday, the Red Scare, and the Misuses of Hollywood's Dumb Blonde Image, Stephen Duncan explains that Holiday's strategy to avoid naming names was to downplay communist affiliations, emphasize her anti-fascist stance, and, most importantly, plead ignorance. As her publicity agent put it, Holiday would play Billy Dawn in front of the committee. And that's essentially what she did. Holiday skillfully evaded the senator's questions, leaning on the Billy Dawn persona to feign confusion. Has anyone tried to prosecute you? Yes. Who? Prosecute? No, I thought you meant persecute.
This country with its institutions belongs to the people who inhabit it.
Priya Longworth's episode of You Must Remember This about Judy Holiday delves into this interrogation quite extensively, so if you're interested in a more detailed look at that, I've linked the episode below. The committee assured Holiday that her testimony would remain confidential, but released it publicly several months later anyway, opening Holiday up to public scrutiny she hadn't anticipated. Duncan writes of the fallout, the most ruinous revelation accompanying the release of Holiday's testimony in September was not that she was a red, but that she was stupid. Reporters pounced, painting Holiday as an innocent dupe, most referred to her specifically as a dumb blonde. Holiday's tactic to save her career and compatriots worked, but the damage to her image as an intelligent woman was severe. After the fervor died down, only a single journalist made a serious attempt to revive Holiday's high IQ image. Never again during her lifetime would the word genius be paired with the name Judy Holiday. This whole situation sucks. That Holiday had to defend or obscure her political opinions in a country that ostensibly espouses free speech, and that she had to do so in order to save her career. It's also unfortunate, given her preferences and ambitions for herself, that her testimony essentially guaranteed that she'd always be remembered for the archetype she hoped to leave behind. But at the same time, she should receive credit for how enormously influential her performance in Born Yesterday was, both in its own time and beyond. We see Holiday's influence on characters like Adelaide from Guys and Dolls, Lorelai from Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, Lena Lamont from Singing in the Rain, played by Jean Hagen, who had been Holiday's understudy in Born Yesterday.
And I can't stand them.
In retrospect, it's clear that she had a marked influence on a later generation of movie actresses who specialized in endearing ditheriness with a plaintive core. Performances such as Mary Steenburgen's in Melvin and Howard, and Goldie Hawn's in practically everything. Hell, even the creative team behind Harley Quinn talks about how Judy inspired the creation of the character. We all have our personal choices for who should have won Best Actress this year. I think we all know who I would have voted for, but one can't diminish what Holiday accomplished here. Nor do I think we can reasonably say that her win was all that surprising. Born Yesterday came out at the right time, touted the right brand of American optimism at a tumultuous political moment, and showcased an all-timer comedic performance. It performed better than All About Eve and Sunset Boulevard at the box office, and gave audiences a new star to represent a new decade at a time when executives were actively searching for fresh personalities. as the president of Fox put it in Variety, nothing, in my strong opinion, transcends the importance of launching as many new film personalities as possible on our screens in the year 1951. The exhibitors can encourage producers to engage and cast such fresh personalities whenever possible, even when some risk is involved. Do you imagine an executive saying that today? Let me know in the comments who you'd have voted for. State your case. I probably won't change my mind, but I look forward to reading.
Well, Judy, what'd you...
Wonderful.
Enjoyed that?
Yes. I think movies are simply wonderful.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it, and you'll always remember this screen snapshot.
Yes, I will. And what's more, movies are better than ever.
Yes, you said it.
Goodbye. It was nice meeting you.
Goodbye, Judy Holiday.
As you may or may not know, Be Kind Rewind is a one-man band. I do all the research, writing, editing. It's all me. And some of those things I do better than others. But since this is what I do now as a job, I'm always looking for ways to improve my skills so that your viewing experience is as engaging as it can be. I've definitely been putting a lot more effort recently into learning tips and tricks that can improve my video editing. I've struggled in the past with masking. I figured out the basics, but I always thought it looked a bit clunky because I wasn't really sure what I was doing. Thankfully, Jordy Vandeput has an entire class on Skillshare where he teaches the ins and outs of masking. In just over a half hour, I learned some super easy strategies to improve my skills. And seriously, it's so satisfying to actually know what all of these little buttons mean instead of just mindlessly playing around and guessing. And I have Jordy and Skillshare to thank for that. Skillshare is the largest online learning community for creatives. It has a wide breadth and depth of topics ranging from illustration, graphic design, and photography to music, marketing, productivity, and more. All taught by industry experts excited to share their tools, techniques, and professional journeys with members. I really value Skillshare's Learn by Doing approach, where members can share a product after completing a class to get feedback from the community. It really helps to see the way other people are taking these instructions and really running with them in an interesting way. If you're interested in film production, Photoshop, making videos for social media, I definitely recommend browsing Skillshare. I'm positive you will find a class that can help you get started or take your creativity to the next level. If you're interested in checking out Skillshare, you're in luck because the first 500 people to use the link in my description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. It's that easy. Just click the link in the description and start learning. You can get started today.